This is Beneficence, a statue in the midst of the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. Benny, as her friends call her, extends her right hand, welcoming everyone to campus. In her left hand, she holds all the treasures of higher education. This magnificent sculpture is the last commissioned work of Daniel Chester French, who is best known as the sculptor of the seated Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Hi, I'm Blaine Brownell, president of Ball State University. Today we announce another chapter in the historic partnership between Insight Distance Learning, the Indiana Academy, Ball State University, Teachers College, and the Best Buy Corporation. Through this partnership, we are able to pull together these resources of advanced technology and personal learning to broadcast a series of 3 live electronic field trips. These field trips open the doors of learning by bringing the nation's treasures to thousands of classrooms across the country. These field trips coincide with the grand opening of the first 15 of 40 new Best Buy retail stores in New York City. The Minneapolis-based Best Buy Corporation is known as a leader in specialty retail of consumer electronics, personal computers, entertainment software, and appliances. Beginning in September, we'll take you to the beaches of Melbourne, Florida, along with Smithsonian scientists from the National Museum of Natural History, to watch as sea turtles return from the ocean to continue the process of creating their next generation. We'll go next to the museum in Arlington, Virginia, where students can explore the often contentious yet interdependent relationship between politicians and the media. In December, prepare to take off for the National Air and Space Museum for an in-depth look at how planes fly and the concepts that make unique aircraft defeat the laws of gravity through the laws of physics. This isn't the first time that Best Buy has brought the world of learning into classrooms using advanced technology through Insight Distance Learning. Last year, the Best Buy Children's Foundation took us on a tour of the Origins of Being Human exhibit. They transported students to a dinosaur dig in Colorado and Utah to discover the science of digging up bones, and they helped explore the creatures and environmental chemistry of life underground. If all this isn't enough excitement for you, how about a trip around the world? In the spring of 2001, Insight Distance Learning at Ball State will begin a 4-part series on African voices, a phenomenal exhibit at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. The series will begin in February with A Struggle for Freedom, a live broadcast from the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C. Then in May, take a trip with us to the African continent and learn about the vast and rich varieties of African history and culture. The final 2 parts of the series will air in the 2001-2002 academic year. Through this partnership, we encourage everyone to turn on the fun through the use of technology. We're delighted to bring these field trips into the classroom, business, and home of all who wish to explore people, places, science, and culture worldwide. For all of us at Ball State University, I'm Blaine Brownell.
Thursday night in June, and the voices in their heads said, "Follow the moon." Inside my head, there was no voice. I didn't hear a single sound. I didn't move. I had no choice. That's when he found me and built the fence around me. Inside my shell, I was alone. I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned. I don't know how he could have known, but in the morning he returned and told me what he'd learned. He said, "It's bound to happen soon. You'll hear the voice inside your head saying, 'Follow the moon.'" He spread his blanket on the sand. He kept the dangers all at bay. He somehow seemed to understand that I needed him to stay. He didn't go away. And then I heard it in my head. At first a squeak and then a croon. The boy was right. It clearly said, "Follow, follow the moon." On that Friday night in June, the voice inside my head said, "Follow the moon." The voice just kept repeating and repeating and repeating, and the drums just kept beating and beating. The moon hung from a silver string, the most beautiful thing. I had no choice. I had to listen to the voice. And then a new voice began to speak. It was a most familiar sound. It said, "That's not the moon you seek. Turn around, turn around. That's not the moon you found." And then he led me to the sea. He knew exactly what to do because he'd found the moon for me. I don't know how he knew, unless he heard it too. On that Friday night in June, when the voice inside my head said, "Follow the moon." Hello and welcome to the Mystery Migration, Tracking Sea Turtles, a live interactive field trip about sea turtles. Sea turtles are magnificent yet mysterious animals, and you will have the chance today to learn about these animals and to talk to some of the scientists who are studying them and trying to protect them. My name is Dottie Klugel, and I'm a marine biologist at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History. I'm here today at the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge in Melbourne Beach, Florida. And we're going to talk about some of the sea turtles that can be found in this area of the world. This show is produced by the Smithsonian Institution and Ball State University and is brought to you by our friends at Best Buy. And I have here with me Cheryl Medina, who is from Best Buy. Cheryl, I'd like to welcome you to our program.
Thank you, Dottie.
And Best Buy has also made it possible for students to come to the refuge and to meet with some of these scientists. We have students here from Schenectady, New York, Orlando, Florida, and Melbourne Beach, Florida. And I'd like to ask you guys, what exactly is a turtle? Who can tell me what a turtle is? Emily, can you tell me?
A turtle is a reptile that has a hard shell.
Okay, Emily says that a turtle is a reptile that has a hard shell. Let's check with Dr. George Zug, who is a curator at the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C., and find out what he says a turtle is.
Turtles are armored reptiles, armored in the sense that they have a top and a bottom shell. In point of fact, no one mistakes a turtle for anything other than a turtle, and no one mistakes any other animal for any other animal. They don't mistake it for a turtle.
Okay, so that's what a turtle is. And students, how many different kinds of turtles do you think that there are? Alex, can you tell me?
280 species.
280 species of turtles. That's what our guess is. Let's go back to Dr. Zug, and he will give us the answer.
How many turtles are there living today? Something, when we're talking on a worldwide basis, something in the order of about 280 species, plus or minus one or two this way. Of sea turtles, definitely 7 species, and it depends. Once again, you have these conflicts of interpretation. There may be 8 different species of turtles. Of these, there are really 2 groups of sea turtles. One, which we call the leatherbacks, and has only 1 species. And then there are the hard-shelled turtles, and those we have, well, there are 7. We have 6 species of hard-shelled turtles. All the sea turtles, well, like most things in biology, you can never say all.
Okay, so Dr. Zug has told us there are 280 different kinds of turtles, about 8 species of sea turtles, 7 if you count one as a subspecies and not its own species of sea turtle. And sometimes you hear the words turtles, tortoises, and terrapins. Okay, well, who can tell me what the difference between those might be? What's a tortoise? Tim, can you tell me?
Well, a tortoise is a land turtle, and want me to tell you the other?
What's a terrapin then?
A terrapin lives in or around brackish water, and then a sea turtle, which we're talking about today, lives in salt water.
That's perfect, Tim. Thank you. So they're all different kinds of turtles. Tortoises and terrapins are just a different kind of turtle. Now, I said earlier that this is a live interactive field trip, which means you're going to have the chance to talk to our scientists here. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the 1-800 number and the email address. Call us with your questions or email your questions in, and we'll ask your questions. The scientists will be able to answer your questions here, or at least give you their best guess at some of your answers. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to 2 of the scientists who work here in the refuge and talk a little bit about the research that goes on here and where exactly the refuge is.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lou Earhart with the University of Central Florida. You can call me Doc. We're here on the East Florida coast. It's a beautiful, if hot, day. We're glad you could be here with us live. This is the area in which my students and I study sea turtles in the water throughout the year, and most especially here on the nesting beaches during the summertime. I'd like to introduce you to Paul Tritak, the refuge manager at the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge. Paul?
Thank you, Doc. We are here in the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge, as Doc has just said, and this is the premier sea turtle nesting beach in the refuge system. Most of you may not know what a National Wildlife Refuge is. A lot of people are familiar with national parks, which are generally set aside for natural areas, for recreation and preservation, but national wildlife refuges are set aside for wildlife. Wildlife comes first, and here on the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuges, this refuge was created primarily for sea turtles because this beach is so important for 3 species of sea turtles, which we will get into in just a few minutes. There are 5 species actually that are found off the coast here of Florida. The first is the leatherback, which is the largest of all of the sea turtles here. Can you tell us a little bit more about leatherbacks, Doc?
Sure. Leatherbacks are the biggest of all sea turtles. They really make all of the rest of them look kind of small. And curiously enough, they're highly specialized for feeding on jellyfish. Very little else. A few other kinds of soft-bodied marine animals, but mostly jellyfish.
And leatherbacks do nest here in the Archie Carr Refuge. We have a few that nest here, about 1 per mile on a good year. But the most abundant species that nest here is the loggerhead. Doc has been studying loggerheads for quite some time.
Loggerheads are intermediate-sized sea turtles. They're not the littlest ones, but they're not anywhere near as big as leatherbacks. And interestingly enough, loggerheads are highly specialized as mollusk feeders. They have tremendously powerful jaws that allow them to take a whelk or a conch or some other clam-like animal and just pulverize it with their jaws, and they're specialized for that.
Another species of turtle that is found off the coast here, some of you may find them when you scuba dive. We rarely see them here nesting in the Archie Carr Refuge, but there have been a couple of records, and that's the hawksbill.
Yeah, the hawksbill is among the smaller of the sea turtles, along with Kemp's Ridley, and hawksbills are especially adapted for feeding on, of all things, sponges. They actually have tiny spicules of glass in their stomachs because those are part of the structure of the sponges that they feed upon.
Now, another species that does nest here frequently in the Archie Carr Refuge, they show a biennial pattern of nesting, and they have peak years and off years, and they've been peaking lately on the even number years, and this has been a record year for green turtles. Is that right, Doc?
Right. The green turtle is the only plant feeder, the only herbivore among the sea turtles, and as such they feed on seagrasses and algae, and they've got jaws that are adapted for that, very sharp serrated jaws that allow them to snip and clip those plants, those underwater plants that compose their diet.
Now, the 5th species of sea turtles, which does swim offshore here, is the Kemp's Ridley. It's the rarest of all sea turtles.
Yes, that's right, the most endangered. Kemp's Ridley is a turtle that basically spends its entire life history in the Gulf of Mexico. But a few of them do make their way around the tip of the Florida Peninsula and come up along the North American continent. Some are even found over on the other side of the Atlantic. Ridleys are crab specialists, and they're normally found in the muddy waters where freshwater rivers pour into the ocean, places that are rich in all kinds of crabs.
So those are the 5 species that are found off the coast of Florida here, and the 3 species, that as we mentioned, that do nest here in the Archie Carr Refuge are in order of abundance: the loggerhead, the green, and the leatherback.
And Doc and Paul, I believe we already have some questions. And again, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see our 1-800 number and the email address. I believe we have an email from a school in Schenectady, New York. Are turtles warm or cold-blooded? That's a good question. Turtles, all reptiles, are cold-blooded. And to be cold-blooded means that the animal has to derive its body heat from its surroundings. Okay? Mammals, for example, are warm-blooded, and that means they can internally regulate their temperature. And it doesn't matter where they are, they can maintain their body temperature. but reptiles and sea turtles and all other turtles have to get their temperature from their surroundings.
And there's usually an exception to the rule. Is that right, Doc?
There's always an exception, as Dr. Zug said, and it's true that leatherbacks have some special adaptations. They're not mammals, they're not mammal-like, but they do have some special morphology that allows them to keep themselves a little warmer, and so that's why we see them in the waters off Labrador and Nova Scotia sometimes in the summer.
Does that make them, are they then considered to be warm-blooded?
No, I don't. I think that would be going too far. It's just that they do have some modifications that allow them to keep their body temperature a few degrees warmer than the ambient. But it's a far cry from homeothermy that we see in mammals and birds.
We have a phone call from Ashley. Ashley, are you there?
Yeah.
Go ahead with your question.
Turtles have trouble getting out of their eggs. Do you help them?
Yeah, Ashley, if I can get you to turn the volume on your monitor down and then repeat your question. Go ahead with your question, Ashley.
If turtles have trouble getting out of their eggs, do you help them?
If turtles have trouble getting out of their eggs, do we help them? Doc, you see a lot of turtle eggs on this beach.
Well, that's, yeah, there's so many nests on a beach like this that we can't possibly get into each one and try to do what you suggest. Ordinarily, they don't really need any help getting out of the egg. And then as far as emerging from the nest, the same thing is true. It happens that a few, just a very small number may have some difficulty, but the truth is that they're pretty much on their own.
Here in the Carr Refuge, we have as many as 1,000 nests per mile, so you can imagine how labor-intensive that would be if we were trying to intervene with each and every nest. Now, some beaches that have very few nests can be a little more particular in their management, but here the main thing is to protect the existing nests in place.
Okay, we have a phone call from Minnesota.
I would like to know how many eggs do leatherback turtles lay?
Leatherbacks. Actually, leatherbacks here in Florida at least average only about 80 eggs or so, around 80 eggs, which is fewer than loggerheads and far fewer than green turtles. They do a funny thing though. They also put shells on little globs of albumin, of egg white in other words. It's not a real egg, but somehow or other a shell gets on a little piece of that, and leatherbacks may have 30 or 40 of those so-called yolkless. They're really false eggs in a nest, whereas any of the other sea turtle species, you only see one every now and then.
We have an email question from Ocoee Elementary School, and our student wants to know, how do you tell a boy turtle from a girl turtle?
Well, when they're adults, it's not hard at all because the male turtles have long tails. Even when you're flying over the ocean in an airplane, you can see a tail that extends well beyond the back of the shell, and you know that's a male. Shorter tails are females. But before they actually mature, before they become adults, it's almost impossible to tell on a live turtle without, in other words, without dissection, whether it's a male or a female. Only once they become adults does it become easy to make that distinction.
Doc, we have an email question from a school in Florida. They want to know that if turtle hatchlings don't grow up with their parents, how do they learn?
It's a fact that reptiles and even birds and certainly amphibians and fishes, all their behavior is much more instinctive than it is learned. I don't have time to get into all the ramifications of that, but the fact is that much of the behavior that turtles engage in is very automatic. It isn't something that they have to learn from their parents. Mammals, which is what we're all mostly familiar with because we are all mammals, do learn a lot as they begin to grow up, and they learn a lot from their parents. But turtles don't have to. It's pretty much pre-programmed into their nervous systems.
Okay, we have a phone call from Mac. Mac, are you there? Max, I'm sorry, Max, are you there? Max, if you have the question, go ahead.
How old are turtles?
I'm sorry, Max, could you repeat your question? How old do turtles get?
Well, Max, I'm sorry, we can't give you a definitive answer to that question. There's no way to look at an adult turtle and say it is 50 years old or 70 years old or what. There are some kinds of other turtles that we can do that. We can count rings on their shells and so forth. Not for sea turtles. We know that some turtles have lived more than 60 years in European aquaria, and we believe that it's not unusual at all for a sea turtle, most sea turtles to live 100 years, but we really don't know that for sure.
So sea turtles live about as long as people do.
Yeah,
we could say roughly.
Roughly as long-lived as people. Mm-hmm.
Paul, I'd like to thank you for joining us here today from the Fish and Wildlife Service here at the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge. And we'd like to talk a little bit about the migration of sea turtles and their life cycles. The show is called The Mystery Migration, and that's for a reason. Sea turtles spend a lot of time and a lot of energy migrating very long distances throughout all of the oceans. Okay. Why exactly they do this and how exactly they do this is somewhat of a mystery still to scientists. Scientists are studying different parts of this. And as they migrate, they are going through different life stages, different parts of their life cycle. And Doc, if we could get you to talk a little bit about the life cycle of sea turtles.
Yes. We're here on the beach now, and of course the eggs hatch and the hatchlings go to the sea. We begin to call them post-hatchlings at that time, and they make their way, depending on the species, they make their way to far offshore as fast as they can to try to get away from the predator-rich nearshore area. Once they get out there, they may spend anywhere from a year and a half for one species to 5 to 10 years for another species far out at sea in a separate habitat. Then they make their way back to the continental margin of the U.S., of North America, and take up residence there for a while. And then they may move on to still another developmental habitat, a place where they begin to mature but don't reach full adulthood. Then finally, they move to the adult stage, where they're big enough and old enough to begin to breed, and they have separate foraging grounds, in some cases at least, for the adults. It's only from that point then that they migrate to the waters off the nesting beaches where mating occurs, and the females then come onto the beaches to lay eggs and start the cycle all over again.
And Doc, we have some footage of the female nesting process. So it's a female who has come up on the beach and begins to lay her nests. And if we can look at that, the females come up on the beach at night when it's darker, so it's safer, and also when the temperature is cooler for them. The sand is not as hot for them. And once they come up on the beach, what do they do then, Doc?
Well, they select a spot. We're not exactly sure how they do that, but they select a spot and begin to settle in. Just lower the hindquarters a little bit in the case of the loggerhead. She's already, in the footage that you're viewing, she's already dug the egg cavity, which she does with a very rhythmic motion of the hind flippers, right, left, right, left, right, left, and then she begins to fill that cavity with the eggs, as you see them here. The eggs are approximately the size, in the case of a loggerhead, approximately the size of a table tennis ball, very, very close to that. And she may put anywhere from 60 to 170 eggs in that chamber before she begins to cover them, as you see here. You're looking at the head of the loggerhead just now, and you may be able to see some fluid in the corner of her eye, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But right now, notice how she's using those hind flippers as though you would use a hand in a mitten. You can do a lot with your hand in a mitten. You can be very manipulative, and so can this turtle. she's now pulling sand from the left and right and stomping it down and covering the nest. There you can see the fluid in the eye. That fluid is only tears in the broadest possible interpretation of that word, tears. It's really an exudate of a gland in the corner of her eye that helps her to rid herself of extra salt. Now she's already finished. She's covered the nest completely and has begun to move back to the water. She's just about to touch the first wave wash, and there she is, heading into the water. I'm sure she's really glad to be back, and she will probably be back on this beach in 2 weeks to do the same thing all over again.
Okay, we have a phone call from Diana. Diana, are you there with your question? Go ahead, Diana.
How do scientists protect turtles?
How do scientists protect turtles? That's an excellent question, Diana, because sea turtles need a lot of protection. Like we said, there are 8 different species of sea turtles, and all of them are either endangered or threatened, which means they all need to be protected by law. There are natural predators or natural threats for sea turtles, but then there are lots of things that humans are doing that put sea turtles at danger, to put them in risk. Things like development on the beach or artificial lighting, those destroy the nesting beaches that are so important for the females to bury their nests and to lay their eggs. So Doc, maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the things that are done here at the Archie Carr Refuge to protect the sea turtles.
Well, the main thing is that we try to maintain the natural attributes of our beaches and keep them intact. Not do things like build seawalls and put lights up and do other things that change the character of the beach. We like to try to do everything we can to maintain. That's what the refuge is all about, maintaining the natural character of the beach so that the beaches and the turtles can produce those millions of hatchlings which are needed. And I believe we have an email from Minnesota. The largest turtle we have ever found on this beach. A loggerhead that weighed 412 pounds, and just by chance that loggerhead was missing her entire left hind flipper. So if she had had that, she probably lost it to a shark attack many years ago. It was totally healed up. If she had had that flipper, she probably would have weighed 425 pounds. And I've seen a loggerhead that elsewhere washed up dead that weighed 445 pounds. Green turtles get up and even a little higher than that sometimes as well.
We were here in the refuge several months ago, and we were actually able to film the process of a female loggerhead laying her eggs. And we can look at that videotape now. You'll see a reddish tint to that film, and that's because there are special red gels or red filters that are on our camera lights. Because we don't want those lights to disturb or to disorient the female as she's laying her eggs.
You can see she's dropping those eggs pretty rapidly, and there's no telling how many she'll lay. We see clutch sizes anywhere from about 60 eggs up to about 170. But if you count enough of them, a large enough number, it will always come out, each year comes out to about 111 or 112. She's doing great. Nice, typical loggerhead.
Okay, we have an email question from South Carolina. How does the pollution affect the sea turtles here at Archie Carr? That's an excellent question. Doc, what are some of the things you've seen?
Well, pollution comes in a lot of varieties, of course. Plastics, oil, and that sort, and all kinds of things. And we've seen a great deal of entanglement. The turtles get all tangled up in very tough, very strong monofilament and other kinds of fishing line. It cuts through their skin and binds up their flippers so that all the circulation is cut off. We see small turtles washing up completely covered with oil, thick crude oil, that is apparently dumped from or flushed from tanks somewhere offshore. And those are pretty much the main things. The interference, the interference with the turtles' activities by, and plastics. We see that like leatherbacks, for example, which eat jellyfish, they apparently aren't able to distinguish certain kinds of plastic containers, milk jugs and things like that, and they actually ingest them, and it plugs up their intestines and causes them to die. There are a number of other things as well.
Now, last night we were out on the beach. We were able to see the emergence of hatchlings from a nest. Let's look at this footage as well. And again, you'll see the same sort of red film, the red tint, and that's again because we had the special gels over our camera lights. When the hatchlings emerge out of their nest, they immediately orient themselves towards the ocean, and scientists think it's the light off of the ocean that attracts the hatchlings. So if there's other light that's on the beach, that will disorient the turtles and cause them to go away from the ocean and towards the other light source. Doc, maybe you could talk a little bit about what we're seeing here on the monitor. I see some loggerhead hatchlings coming down the beach.
We were very fortunate to see that emergence last night. It doesn't, even sea turtle biologists don't see very many of those because you have to be Johnny on the spot, just there when it happens, because the hatchlings get out in a hurry. And you just saw some footage of an actual and real loggerhead emergence. There was nothing faked about it. It really happened at that instant.
Okay, we have an email question from Kevin. Kevin wants to know if the back or front flippers of a sea turtle are stronger.
That's a good question. Certainly the front flippers are stronger. For those of us in the business, of course, we do dissections of turtles once in a while, and inside of a turtle you see these massive shoulder muscles. They swim primarily, they propel themselves primarily with the front flippers. The hind flippers are more like rudders, and they guide themselves with the hind flippers, and so they're not quite as well muscularized and not quite as powerful.
I believe we have a phone call.
Yes, this is from Mrs. Huffman's class.
Hi, go ahead with your question.
We would like to know how long sea turtles have been around.
How long have sea turtles been around? Sea turtles have been around for millions of years, but not the exact sea turtles that we see here today.
Right, not the very same ones, but similar sea turtles have been in existence for well over 100 million years, upwards beyond 120 million years, actually. And there were a great variety of other kinds back in the Mesozoic and a long time ago. But they've been around for a very long time.
So sea turtles actually have been around since the time of dinosaurs.
And before.
And before. We've talked a lot about the life cycle of sea turtles. Okay, we've shown you the nesting process that happens here on the beach. The hatchlings emerging from the nest. But then what do the hatchlings do once they come out? They have to make their way down the beach and make their way to the water. And what we're going to do here is we're going to have some of our students demonstrate what it's like to be a hatchling and some of the things they might encounter on their way down the beach. We have our students set up over here. Some of them are hatchlings. They're the ones that are in the green vests. But then we also have some predators of hatchlings. So some natural threats to hatchlings. For example, there are students here who represent ghost crabs. Also some that represent seagulls that would be flying around the beach. And then down towards the water, you see some students who represent the big fish or the sharks that might be wading in the water to eat the hatchlings. So what I want the predators to do, when the hatchlings start running down the beach, I want you to try to catch them, okay? When you tag a turtle, touch it here on its shoulder, and that means the predator has eaten the hatchling, and the hatchling is now dead. So hatchlings, I want you then to lay down here in the sand wherever you get tagged. You want to try to make it all the way down the beach and all the way to the water, all right? So when I give you the signal, I want you to go. On your mark, get set, go. We have 3 that made it down to the ocean, so about about right. But along the way, they had lots of predators. And sometimes the predators will get most of the hatchlings, sometimes they'll get all of them, or sometimes more of them will survive. It just depends on how many predators might be around on the beach at that time. When the turtles come to the beach, how do they know exactly what beach to come to? To talk about that, I'd like to introduce somebody else to our program, David Godfrey, who's the Executive Director of the Caribbean Conservation Corporation, or CCC. And David, welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
How do sea turtles find the beach, the same beach where they were born, and why would they come back to the same beach?
Well, there are a lot of things we've been studying to try to determine that. We know that there's some kind of imprinting that goes on with the hatchlings while they're in the nest and possibly even while they're actually crawling down to the water. Something about the chemical makeup of the sand here on this beach or whatever beach they happen to be from, or maybe something about the water, the smells in the water that lead them back here. New types of research have also determined that while they're in the open ocean, they can actually use the Earth's magnetic fields to determine where they are on the planet. Every point on the planet has a distinct magnetic field characteristic, and physiologically, sea turtles actually have the ability to detect that field and use it to pinpoint their location, and they can migrate using that.
So it's sort of like an internal compass that
Yes.
they can use to find the same beach.
Very similar to that.
What's the advantage to coming back to the same place?
Well, there are turtles nest in a variety of beaches, and there are many numbers of characteristics about those beaches that make them desirable for turtles. They provide suitable dry sand to lay the nests. They're relatively dark at night, so the females are encouraged to come up and know there aren't a lot of predators around. Predators will be another issue. There are not so many to eat all the eggs, so that enough survive, and the beach has enough characteristics that make it possible for that population to do well. So they keep coming back.
So it's certainly easier for scientists to study sea turtles when the turtles are on land.
Absolutely.
It's harder to study them when they are out in the water, since they are so well adapted to the oceans and we're not. But with new technology, we are actually able to track turtles while they're in the water, aren't we?
Right, Dottie. We're definitely in the space age when it comes to studying turtles. New technology allows us to use satellites and a little transmitter that we put on the backs of these turtles, and we can monitor the adults in particular. We have some footage that we're going to show you of a transmitter being put on the back of a turtle. It's a relatively small device, about the size of a Sony Walkman, and it's attached to the turtle using epoxies and resin, similar to some of the materials used to make surfboards. But it attaches the little device on, and then whenever the turtle comes up to the surface to breathe, the little antenna breaks the surface and sends a signal to a satellite. We're able to take the information sent from the transmitter and plot the turtle's migration, thus learning really important information about migratory routes, some of the habitats they're using out in the ocean, and we make that information available to people in the public, especially in schools, because we find that a lot of kids are really interested in this migration. It's a mysterious thing, it's fascinating, and so we put the movements of the turtles on our website, and I think in a minute we'll show you one of the maps that we put on. But the devices don't interfere with the turtles' migration. We find that they do come back to the beach to nest successfully. They're able to mate, and it really provides extremely important information. As I said, it's important to understand what turtles are doing after they leave the beach in order to develop conservation programs to protect them.
David, we have an email question. The student wants to know if when the turtles are migrating, do they ever find their parents?
Well, that is a very good question, but the fact is turtles are pretty solitary once they come out. We have a track that I think we're showing you now of one of the turtles. But we do know that turtles pretty much keep to themselves. Sometimes you'll find them in groups simply because the feeding habitat is conducive to many turtles being there, but they really don't move around as family units. Once they leave the beach, they're pretty much on their own.
We have an email question about sea turtles and pollution. Can sea turtles survive pollution like oil spills?
Well, oil spills and other types of pollution are a great problem for turtles, and it's one of the reasons that many of the species face extinction. They're threatened. Human activities, are putting a lot of foreign materials, hazardous materials in the water. Some things they can contend with. Others, like oil spills in particular, can be a real problem to sea turtles. So we're trying to do lots of things to eliminate those hazards.
We have another email question. This is from Mrs. Weaver's class, and the students want to know, how dangerous are boats to sea turtles while they're migrating?
Well, they're extremely dangerous. We see a lot of turtles that wash up on the beach with cracked shells. Typically, as you know, they have to come to the surface to breathe, and that's where the boats are. So fast-moving boats and propellers are real problems, especially here in Florida and some of the warmer climate states where there are boats year-round and turtles in the water year-round. And we see collisions. A lot of turtles are killed that way, so we need people to really slow down and pay attention and do their best to keep an eye out for them.
We have one more email question, and the students would like to know how fast the sea turtles are swimming while they're migrating.
Well, they move at various speeds. They can travel in bursts of 30, maybe 35 miles an hour. The leatherback in particular is one of the fastest out there, but they all can swim quite fast. They almost fly like birds underwater. They use their flippers and flap them much like a wing and really do move quite fast. We've had turtles that, can travel hundreds of miles in just a few days, so they're really cruising.
And David, our students they can follow the tracks of some of the turtles that CCC has put transmitters on. What's the website address to do that?
It's cccturtle.org. And here's an example. I think you might have the website on the screen now. But this is an example of the type of map where we have many turtles that are being tracked right now, some that are just leaving the nesting beach. And we're going to watch them for the next several months, even up to a year. And you can watch right along with us and find out where these turtles are going. We find that a lot of schools even become interested, or a lot of kids, in adopting some of these turtles and sort of taking them to heart and contributing to the studies and conservation efforts that we're involved in.
Great. I'd like to thank David for joining us here in our program. The CCC does a lot of important work for sea turtles, but there are lots of other organizations out there that are working to protect sea turtles. The Mote Marine Laboratory, that's in Sarasota, Florida. That's a research facility, but they also have a rehabilitation center there where they rehabilitate sick or injured animals, including sea turtles. And we have on the phone Petra Cunningham from Mote Marine Lab. Petra, are you there?
I'm here.
Hi, Petra. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being here with us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Petra, could you talk to us a little bit about the rehabilitation process at Mote Marine Lab?
I sure will. At Mote Marine Lab, we have a sea turtle rehabilitation hospital. When turtles are found injured out on the beaches or out in the water, they're brought to our rehabilitation hospital. And we have veterinarians here who work to get them healthy so they can be returned to the wild.
Great. And how many sea turtles do you usually get there to rehabilitate?
Well, it depends. This past year, we've had between 14 and 18 this year to rehabilitate. Several different species: Kemp's ridleys, loggerheads, green turtles.
Who brings the turtles to your facilities? How do they get there?
Well, people that are walking on the beaches or fishermen that are out in their boats, they find the turtles, and they can tell that the turtles are injured because they're not in the water swimming like they should be. And so they bring the turtles to Mote, and we have a lot of equipment here and tanks and veterinarians who examine them and determine a course of treatment. And the animals are kept here until they're certified to be healthy, and then they're released back into the wild.
Now, Petra, I know that you had one sea turtle in particular named Sadie who is at the Mote Marine Lab. Can you tell us a little bit about how Sadie ended up there and what happened to her?
Well, Sadie was brought to our hospital by the Anna Marie Island Turtle Watch. Those people were walking on the beach doing their turtle watches in the morning looking for eggs. And they found Sadie. She'd come up on the beach to the nest to lay her eggs, and she'd fallen off of a rock embankment. And she'd fallen down and fractured her plastron, which is the bottom shell of the turtle. And the fracture was very bad, and she was brought here. We x-rayed her and found that she was carrying eggs. She had never had a chance to nest. We had a veterinarian who was an orthopedic surgeon, and he brought some bone plates that were used to mend broken legs in horses and things. And he put those bone plates on her shell to hold the fracture together. And after about 5 months, the fracture had healed to the point where we could take the bone screws off and put on just wires. And then those screws were removed, and Sadie was released.
That's great. Thank you, Petra, for explaining to us about the rehabilitation work that goes on at the Moat Marine Lab.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. So these are some of the examples of some of the research that's going on about sea turtles, but let's talk about the research that goes on here in the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge. And to do that, I'd like to bring back Paul Tritak from Fish and Wildlife and also Doc. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the refuge itself and some of the research that goes on here.
Well, actually, it was the research that started the refuge, and I'll let Doc talk a little bit about that because it's what provided the justification for creating this National Wildlife Refuge.
Yes, that was a major priority for us, and it still is. That is to say, the actual enumeration, the counting of the number of nests that loggerheads and green turtles and leatherbacks deposit on this beach. In the early years, during the 1980s, those numbers made it clear that this was the most important sea turtle nesting beach in this country. And a lot of people who are good at public relations and that sort of thing took that information and built it into a proposal for a new National Wildlife Refuge. Now that we have the refuge, whose principal purpose is to protect sea turtle nesting habitat, we're still interested in those numbers, counting all the nests that are made throughout the long summer, but we've also got a new focus for our research, and that is in documenting the success of that nesting. Remember that the true measure of a nesting beach is not in just how many nests are deposited there, but how many eggs actually hatch and produce hatchlings that move down to the water and can begin the cycle again. So we've put a lot of effort into that in recent years, marking nests, counting the eggs as they are laid, as you saw on the tape a little while ago, and then going back about 8 or 8.5 weeks later and inventorying those nests and to see how successful they were. And we think that if we see problems emerging with the number of eggs that hatch, if they should start to go down or something like that, we can take measures. We can try to figure out why and take measures to correct it.
And the research started right here in the South Brevard portion of the refuge, but there's actually 2 other survey areas in the refuge. The refuge itself spans about 20 miles of beach, and there's 3 miles of beach that's surveyed by Sebastian Inlet State Recreation Area, and then the southern portion of the refuge is surveyed by us at the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so collaboratively, we have nesting data for the entire Archie Carr Refuge, but obviously most of the nesting occurs here in Dr. Earhart's study area.
Okay, I believe we have a phone call from Richard. Richard, are you there with a question? Richard, can you speak up and repeat your question?
How long do sea turtles live?
How long do sea turtles live?
Yes, that's a question that we get asked an awful lot, and I'm sorry to say that we can't give you a definitive answer. There are many kinds of turtles, especially tortoises, that have rings on their shells, and we can count them, and they give us an idea of how old they are. Sea turtles are not like that, so there's no way that we can just look at a turtle and count something on it, like counting the rings of a tree or something like that. We know that the loggerheads have lived more than 60 years in aquaria, and we will not be surprised to learn that most sea turtles live to be 100 or so, but we don't know that, and we can't decide for sure about any individual at this time.
Next, we have a question from Skylar. Are you there with your question?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead with your question.
How long does the female turtle hold eggs inside of her?
That's an excellent question, Skylar.
What's the question?
How long does the female hold the eggs inside of her before she lays them?
Well, let's start from the point where a clutch of eggs is laid. About 12 hours later, that female ovulates, produces another clutch of eggs, and they move into something called the oviduct. And there they get fertilized, and she begins to put albumin, you know, the white of an egg. She begins to put albumin on them, and then she begins to put the shell on them. And it takes a while to put the shell on there. So from the time that she ovulates them till the time that they're laid is about 13 or 14 days. And she continues to put layers of that shell over that egg right up through the 12th or 13th day.
Jenny has our next question. Jenny, are you there?
Who are not talking, who would like to go over to that area. Hello?
Hi, Jenny, are you there?
Who are not talking.
Okay, go ahead with your question.
How much does a
Jenny, are you there? Okay. We weren't able to get Jenny's question, but Doc, you mentioned the surveying you do of the nesting activity here on the beach, and one of the things that you and your crew does is to inventory a nest to determine the success of that nest.
Exactly.
And what we're going to do is we have Dean Bagley and Karen Frucci, who are actually at a nest right now with our students, and they have dug up the nest and they're beginning to look at the eggs. Could you tell us a little bit about what they're doing as they start the process?
Sure. We've got a whole bunch of nests marked for this purpose, and sometimes it can be a little bit hard to find them. It's a lot of work, hard work, and once you do find them, you dig into a nest that hopefully is mostly full of hatched shells. In other words, empty egg shells, shells that produced turtle hatchlings that have gone to the sea. But there are always some eggs that don't make it. There are always going to be some that are pretty rotten in there. So it's not a very pleasant exercise doing these inventories, and we do hundreds of them every year. And what we're looking for is how many of the eggs seem to have failed very early on, right at the very beginning. How many of them got to some intermediate stage of development and then failed, and how many of them got all the way to hatching, actually hatched out of the shell, but were unable for one reason or another to get out of the nest, and they're found there as dead hatchlings. All of this goes into the computation then of how successful any given nest is, and the accumulated data from 300 or 400 of those nests tells us how successful nesting was up and down this whole beach.
We've learned a lot about sea turtles here today, and we've also learned that there's still a lot more that needs to be learned about sea turtles. What I'd like to do is I'd like to have David Godfrey join us again, and we'd like to talk a little bit about why we should care about sea turtles and why we should care why sea turtles are threatened, why are they in danger. David, what would happen if sea turtles went extinct?
Well, clearly sea turtles have been around for quite a long time, as you said, since before the time of dinosaurs. So we know that they fill a very important ecological role in the world. And it would be a real shame since they were thriving up until maybe a couple hundred or 100 years ago, and mainly because of the actions of humans, they've been slipping toward extinction. We really bear responsibility to do all we can to save them, and we know generally what it will take to save them. That is, saving the natural ingredients of their lives. A healthy beach, a healthy marine environment, and stop needlessly doing things that result in their demise. And we can do it, and we should.
And in addition, I mean, sea turtles are important parts of their ecosystems. Other animals and plants rely on the sea turtles being part of this ecosystem. So
Exactly.
If we lose the sea turtles, we have no idea what the devastating effects might be felt in all of these other ecosystems. David, so what are some of the things that kids can do to help protect sea turtles?
Well, if they live near the beach, they can learn about the things to do to keep the beach dark at night. They can get involved in beach cleanups. There are many organizations like ours that are studying turtles and involved in direct activities that save them. We invite children and anyone really to become directly engaged by adopting a sea turtle. It's a $25 donation, and we obviously use the funds to do all kinds of good research and direct conservation activities. People can also support the Archie Carr Refuge. This is our nation's only national wildlife refuge dedicated for sea turtle conservation, and we'd like people to speak out in support of this refuge when they get an opportunity to. We're trying to preserve this land before it gets developed.
Guys.
There are still portions of the beach here that are, threatened with development. And there are things we can do to save it before it's gone. So if we all work together, we can really make a difference in the survival of sea turtles.
We talked about what you could do specifically to save sea turtles, but it's also very important to actually protect the habitat that the sea turtles need. And so we have some students who actually live in this area. They go to a nearby school, and they are working to help protect the beach environment for these sea turtles. I have Emily and I have Tim here, who are from Gemini Elementary School. And Tim, could you tell me what you just brought here?
Well, yes, these are two plants that are native to this area. Oops.
Okay, they're two plants native to the area.
Yeah, and this one is the beauty berry, named after its somewhat beautiful berries. Some of these are sunburnt. So, and then this is the fire bush, and the flowers haven't bloomed yet, but it'll get a beautiful red trumpet flower when it blooms.
And Tim and Emily, could you explain to us, what are you guys doing with these plants?
What we are doing is, well, the town of Melbourne Beach bought a land a couple miles down to plant all these plants so the turtles can come up and lay their eggs in a safe place.
And, well, a lot of these plants, there are others that we're planting, including this, the dune sunflower, which you can see around us. The sea oats, which are the ones that look like wheat, and then you might not be able to see any, but also the sea grapes. These all hold the soil in place and prevent erosion, because not only do sea turtles face natural predators, but erosion can also destroy their beaches. So we need to protect their habitat as well as protecting them.
Right. Tim and Emily have done an excellent job explaining a local conservation project, a local way that you can get involved in protecting sea turtles. What I'd like to do is thank everybody that has participated in our electronic field trip here today. I'd like to thank Paul from Fish and Wildlife, David from the CCC, and I'd also like to thank Doc, especially, who does so much important research here in the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge. Thanks also to our students who were involved, and you for watching at home and calling in with your great questions. And I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Best Buy, for making this possible. By Courtyard Marriott.
And now, a gentleman for whom no goal is too great to achieve, no obstacle too difficult to overcome. Please welcome the Executive Vice President of West Coast Operations, Steve Doppold.